Previously in the sink of the Bismarck. Bismarck has just sunk HMS Hood, and the Prince of Wales with cruisers Norfolk and Suffolk are stalking the ship. Bismarck has been hit during the encounter with HMS Hood and the Prince of Wales and requires repairs. Lutyens has made the call to go to an occupied port in France called Brest against Lindemann's advice to go and turn back to head to Norway. Britain has become outraged over the loss of HMS Hood and sends the home fleet under the command of Admiral Tovey to sink the Bismarck. HMS Rodney has been called off patrol and turned to steam towards the battleship Bismarck. They sent 6 battleships and battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 30 cruisers and 21 destroyers to do one job: sink the Bismarck. During the chase between the 2 cruisers and Bismarck, Lutyens decided to allow the German cruiser Prince Eugen to break away. He made Bismarck turn around to face the cruisers and Prince of Wales and opened fire. The 2 cruisers turned away and Prince of Wales opened up. Prince Eugen was able to break into the Atlantic and raid convoys, and then eventually she returned to Brest to take part in another event, but that's for another day. At 10 o'clock at night, the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious launched an attack with the fiery Swordfish torpedo bombers of the 825th Naval Air Squadron to attack the Bismarck. The Swordfish was a lightweight biplane made of metal and fabric. They were lightweight and slow and outdated for modern planes. Each one carried a torpedo to hit the Bismarck with. Now Bismarck wasn't fitted fully, so a lot of her AA guns weren't equipped. And as the Swordfish approached, all hell erupted from Bismarck, and she opened fire on the planes. But due to them being slow, the guns were just not able to hit them. They were just shooting past them or below them or anywhere, but they just couldn't hit the planes. Bismarck used her 15-inch guns to cause huge columns of water to attempt to distract the planes, but this very failed, and no Swordfish was shot down. Each Swordfish dropped their torpedoes, but only one of them hit, and this was launched by Lieutenant Percy Jig. This torpedo hit Bismarck's armour belt and did little damage to her. However, this caused the death of 1 seaman and several were injured. With all torpedoes dropped, the Swordfish returned to the carrier, losing no planes or men. Shortly after the Swordfish attack, Prince of Wales fired at Bismarck again, and Bismarck returned fire at her. No ships hit each other, and Prince of Wales finally pulled off the attack, and played no further part in this game of chess. However, the 2 cruisers had to zigzag in order to evade U-boats in the area as they were in the Atlantic. Lutyens had to lose the ships on his tail, and on the 25th of May he gave the order to zigzag for 20 hours. His move pulled off and the British lost the Bismarck at 3:30 in the morning. The Royal Navy searched the entire area where she could be, but there's a problem. Many of the British ships were low on fuel and had to return soon. Victorious and her escorting cruisers were sent west, Norfolk and Suffolk continued to the southwest, and Tovey continued to steam toward the mid-Atlantic. The Navy had sent for the aircraft carrier Ark Royal to head to the Atlantic to hunt for Bismarck, but she would be a day away. Lutyens was worried that High Command thought that he would have failed his mission and the ship would have been sunk, and he decided to send long radio messages to the Naval Group West headquarters in Paris to let them know the situation. However, Lindemann strongly advised of this, saying that it would reveal the location of Bismarck, but Lutyens, he knew better. And this further put up the whole Lindemann and Lutyens arguing with each other. However, Lindemann was right. The signals were intercepted by the British, and it was found out that Lutyens wanted to go to France to gain repairs and go to the Atlantic. The British realised that they were looking the wrong way, and they thought that she was going to go to Germany for repairs. This blunder gave Bismarck a chance to go to a French port. Her choice was Brest. The British knew that the Bismarck was to go to a French port, but they didn't know which one. And they had to find out. And they did, when the British codebreakers found out that by decrypting messages that she was going to Brest to seek repairs, and that the Luftwaffe was going to provide support there. Also, the Luftwaffe was being restationed at Brest, and suddenly they realised that she was going to Brest. They knew where she was headed and were able to send ships to converge on her to not allow her to slip through. The British used PBY Catalans planes to scout out the area. These planes were leased to the British by the USA, because USA and British are best buddies, and they were very effective at long range. They could find anything. They were very effective long-ranged floating planes, and they required not that much fuel. They found Bismarck 790 miles off Brest on the 26th of May at 10:35 in the morning. Bismarck opened up on the plain and they knew that she was the ship they were looking for. In less than a day, she would be under the protection of U-boats and Luftwaffe. The Navy had to strike, but no ships were close enough. The only way in which the British could sink her or get to her would be to launch a long-range attack from the carrier Ark Royal, which was on the scene. The carrier steamed ahead to launch an air assault against Bismarck. She had 2 chances to slow down the Bismarck with the Swordfish planes. The planes were equipped with advanced magnetic detectors to strike Bismarck. The men were told that the only 2 ships in the sector was Bismarck and Ark Royal. Little did the pilots know that the cruiser HMS Sheffield was sent ahead as well to go after Bismarck. At 4:10 in the afternoon, the planes saw a ship down below them and went in for a bombing run on the ship. The ship surprisingly didn't open fire at the Swordfish and allow them to drop their torpedoes. Meanwhile, on board the Sheffield, everyone was going frantic as the planes were attacking them and not realising that they weren't the Bismarck. However, many of the torpedoes exploded on contact due to them being faulty, but 5 made it into the water and streamed towards the ship. Sheffield was able to dodge the torpedoes and the Swordfish realised that they were targeting the wrong ship, as it was smaller than a usual battleship and it was flying the Royal Navy ensign. They returned to Ark Royal and refitted with the simple contact torpedoes that was used on the previous attack. They only had 1 shot left to attack the Bismarck, 1 shot to slow her down, 1 shot to save the convoys. This was it. The second attack was launched at 7:10 and at 20:47 they began their attack on the Bismarck, the correct ship this time. As the Swordfish approached, Bismarck decided to fire at Sheffield to reduce the risk of being attacked or damaged. Bismarck was just firing at any ship close to her because they could cause damage to her. These shells straddled the cruiser with a second salvo and Sheffield had to quickly retreat under a smoke screen. Unfortunately, some men died aboard the Sheffield and some were injured. Swordfish then attacked and Bismarck began to turn as her anti-air batteries opened up and engaged the planes. One Swordfish operator leant over the side and looked at the waves for the right moment to drop the torpedo. The torpedo hit amidships on the port side just below the main armour belt and the force explosion was contained, but it caused some structural damage to the ship and minor flooding. Not very good. And then the Bismarck decided to make a sharp turn in order to avoid the torpedoes. This proved to be a fatal mistake of Captain Lindemann and Admiral Lutyens. The second torpedo hit Bismarck in her stern on the port side near the port rudder shaft. The rudder was jammed due to this and it became locked at a 12-degree turn to port. The crew attempted to free the rudder with divers, but it was hopeless. All Bismarck could do now was a big circle in the ocean. At 9:15, Lutyens reported that the ship was unmovable. It was starting to become clear that people on the Bismarck began to think that she wasn't really that unsinkable and that she was going to be sunk and nothing could stop them. The Swordfish, thinking they failed their mission, returned to the Ark Royal, but the British made a discovery that Bismarck was now sailing away from France and in fact she was constantly turning to port. Then they realised that the Bismarck was helpless and is constantly turning in a big circle. This gave Tovey the chance to strike, and with only 2 battleships available, Rodney and King George V along with cruisers Dorsetshire and Norfolk, he had to sink her. On the 26th of May, Lutyens decided to signal headquarters at 21:40. He told them this: "Ship unmovable, we will fight to the last shell, long live the Führer." Throughout the night, Bismarck fired at cruisers that were following her or were in range, so that she could buy time for help to come. The crew attempted to launch one of the float planes to carry away the ship's war diary, footage of the engagement with HUD, and other important documents, so that they would not fall into the hands of the British. But the catapult was damaged by the Prince of Wales during the battle before, and so they threw the plane overboard into the Atlantic Ocean. The hunt has now come to the big finale. The climax of the battle has been reached. The final battle for Bismarck was about to begin. After daybreak on the 27th of May, King George V led the attack with Rodney following behind her, close to port. At 8:43, lookouts on King George V spotted Bismarck at around 23,000 meters away. 4 minutes later, Rodney's 2 forward turrets, which consisted of 16-inch guns, 1 inch bigger than Bismarck, opened fire, with King George V following after. Bismarck returned fire at the two British ships at 8:50 with her forward guns at Rodney. She attempted to sink Rodney as she was an older ship and she would be an easy target, which they fought with HMS Hood. But due to Bismarck's jammed rudder, she was not able to score any hits on her and only straddled her, as the guns would have to constantly move and they couldn't calculate their aiming correctly. As the range fell, the ship's secondaries opened up. Norfolk and Dorsetshire closed in and began firing with their 8-inch small guns. All hell rained on Bismarck as both ships just bombarded the sheer Bismarck. King George V was just firing and Rodney was just firing at her, just bombarding her. At 9 a 16-inch shell from Rodney struck Bismarck's forward superstructure, killing hundreds of men and severely damaging the two forward turrets. Some people think that this salvo probably killed both Lindemann and Lutyens and the rest of the bridge staff. The main fire control director was also destroyed by this hit. A second shell from the salvo struck the forward main battery, which was disabled, though it was able to manage fire one last salvo at 9:27. Lieutenant von Mullenheim-Rechberg in the rear control station took over the firing control of the rear turrets. He managed to fire 3 salvos before a shell destroyed the gun director, disabling his equipment. He then gave the order for the guns to fire independently, but by 9:31 all 4 main battery turrets had been put out of action. Bismarck was now unable to fight back and the British kept firing to sink her. By 10 o'clock, Tovey's 2 battleships had fired over 700 shells, many of them at close range, and Bismarck had been reduced to a burning hulk aflame from stem to stern. She was slowly settling by the stern and had a 20-degree list to port. Rodney closed in to 2,700 metres at point-blank range for her guns and continued to fire. Tovey could not cease fire until the Germans struck their ensigns and it became clear that they were abandoning ship. Rodney fired 2 torpedoes from her port side and claimed 1 hit. This was the only time in history recorded that a battleship supposedly hit another one with torpedoes. It was First Officer Hans Bowles who ordered the men below decks to abandon ship and prepare scuttling charges to not allow the Bismarck to fall into British hands, even though they had no intention to capture her and just to sink her. 4 British ships fired more than 2,800 shells at Bismarck and scored 400 hits, but they were unable to sink Bismarck by gunfire. The problem was, by 20 past 10, Tovey's ships were low on fuel and would have to turn back. So Tovey ordered the cruiser Dorsetshire to sink Bismarck with torpedoes and sent his battleships back to port. Dorsetshire fired torpedoes into Bismarck, and by the time these torpedo attacks took place, the ship was already listing so badly that the sea was coming up to the deck. At around 10:35, Bismarck capsized to port and then slowly sank by the stern, disappearing from the surface at 10:40. Tovey had confirmed that the Bismarck was sunk. Around 400 men were now in the water. Dorsetshire and the destroyer Maui moved in and lowered ropes to pull survivors on board, but at 11:40 Dorsetshire's captain ordered the rescue effort to be abandoned after lookouts spotted what they thought was a U-boat in the area. Dorsetshire had rescued 85 men and Maui picked up 25 by the time that they left the scene. A U-boat later reached the survivors and found 3 men, and a German trawler rescued another 2. Out of a crew of 2,200 men, only 114 survived. More men died on the Bismarck than on HMS Hood. But who was to blame? Was it Lindemann for his decision to sink Hood? Was it Lutyens for heading to Brest? Or was it even Hitler for not organising the operation fully and only sending 2 capital ships with no cruiser or destroyer escort of any kind? We may never know what caused Bismarck to sink. We may never know who truly caused her to sink. But we know the lessons that were learned from this encounter, from this battle, from this engagement. Hitler became worried about his capital megaships, and Adam moved to the Baltic. Tirpitz, the sister ship to Bismarck, was placed up north to become part of his Atlantic Wall, and did nothing until she attacked the convoy under orders of Admiral Raeder. This would cause the cancellation of the Z&H plan, and Hitler had no intention of using the navy after this point. Prince Eugen's raiding proved fruitless, and she didn't really do anything during the raiding. She returned to Brest safety, but not to see Bismarck. After this, she was involved in another big event, the dash across the English Channel, where the German ships Skarnhorst, Gneisenau, Prince Eugen had to go and get from one side to the other. The swordfish proved that air superiority can lead to ships being sunk, and that even the most simple aircraft can destroy a massive behemoth. Another example was when the Americans sank the Yamato and the Musashi, and another example includes Prince of Wales, which was sunk by the Japanese after Pearl Harbor. Many people argue over how powerful the Bismarck was, and question how powerful the British Navy was during this. HMS Hood was sunk, and it proved that the Navy wasn't really as powerful as they seemed. HMS Hood proved that Britain was not as invincible, and that Britain was in danger. But it also proved that the biggest ships, under any odds, can be destroyed, and that anything is not invincible. It also proved that you could have the most powerful weapon afloat, but if you had many people gang up on you, then it would become worthless. Another example was the Tiger tank, as this was one of the most powerful tanks ever constructed. But if it came up against many Shermans or many T-34s, it would become swarmed and destroyed. And it proved that you can have the most powerfulest thing ever, but if you have many of something less powerful, it can gang up and destroy it. Bismarck is a famous ship, and in my opinion, she is the most powerfulest warship ever constructed. Even though her time was short, it was incredibly famous for sinking of Hood and how powerful she was. She has had a big impact on culture today, with most battleships appearing in people's minds either looking like her or looking like the Iowa-class battleships. Many documentaries have been made of her, and she has been implemented into many video games such as Steel Ocean and World of Warships, which are currently doing an event for the Hunt of Bismarck, which I'm taking part in now. Bismarck will always be important to me. Ever since I found out about her when I was 3 or 4 years old, she has always fascinated me, just like the Titanic did. Since my time, I have learned more and more from history, and Bismarck still fascinates me to this day, as she took part in the biggest manhunt ever, and the biggest battle in the Atlantic. I would just like 10 seconds to think about those men who took part in the war, on every ship, every tank, every plane, every machine, every workplace, home, country, and just think of those who were lost in the war that was so horrific. But I'll tell you one thing, she made a brilliant song. And if you know the words, you can sing along. Hit it!